So we're back, and luckily we're right on time, so we can proceed very comfortably with the next presentation. And this presentation is going to be chaired by Laura. So Laura, please, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you. So next presentation is from Laura Dellagiacoma, who is a PhD candidate at Friedrich Schiller University of Vienna, and who is working within the Institute for Democracy and Civil Society. In her project, Laura investigates the influential mechanisms between online hate speech on social media and hate crime, analyzing both the micro and macro level processes. She graduated in community psychology at the University of Padua and gained experiences abroad at the University of Hamburg and at the University of Helsinki. His master's thesis is based on the research project DGIN of the University of Helsinki, in which she participated as a research assistant. Also, after graduation, she worked as a project management assistant within the EU-MINT project, Euro Regions, Migration and Integration of the Iraq Research Institute of Bolzano. Before joining NetAid, Laura worked as a trainee at the European Union Agency for Fundamental Rights within the Research and Data Unit. In this role, she mainly worked on the EU immigrants and descendant service and on hate crime. So, Laura, floor is yours, and thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Laura, for the presentation. Way too long, I'm sorry. So I'll go straight with my presentation. You can see it, right? Okay. So thank you very much. I'm very glad to be here and take part in this international workshop. Together with Tegan and Eva, I just started with my PhD within NetAid, and this is a side project I've been working on, and I am very much looking forward for your comments. So the title of my presentation is Online Platform Users and the Perpetration of Online Hate Speech, the Opposite Effects of Right-Wing Authoritarianism and Social Dominance Orientation. In the last years, research on online hate speech has been growing fast in different fields, yet the main focus has been set on the content of online hate speech and the effects of hate speech on victims. And yet less is known on the perpetration of online hate speech from the perpetrator's perspective, especially for individuals that are not necessarily in a right-wing extremist group. And for this reason, I decided to conduct statistical analysis on the online hate data of the Institute for Democracy and Civil Society in order to shed light on what motivates individuals to perpetrate online hate speech, what psychosocial goals are pursued through online hate speech, and which characteristics of the social context give rise and allowance for it. And I think that answering these questions is crucial to strategically identify intervention and prevention measures to limit the spread of hate both online and offline. Before proceeding with my work, I would like to specify how online hate speech is defined in my analysis. And I draw from Cohen-Almaguer definition of online hate speech, which is defined as a bias-motivated, hostile, malicious speech that is against innate, perceived, or actual characteristic of individuals or of a group of people. It expresses prejudice attitude against individuals based on gender, race, religion, ethnicity, color, national origin, disability, or sexual orientation. And it is indeed intended to injure and to foment brutality against victims. And now coming back to my previous questions on what motivates individuals to perpetrate online hate speech, This refers to what in psychology is called ideological attitudes. Ideological attitudes are of two kinds. Within psychology, they are studied through right-wing authoritarianism and social dominance orientation. Those dimensions go beyond the political spectrum of left and right wing, and they are considered to be present in all individuals, at least to a certain level, and they have been studied across different cultures. Research on right-wing authoritarianism was initiated by Adorno and colleagues after the Second World War in order to understand what led to conformity to fascism and Nazism, while social dominance orientation research was developed by Prato and colleagues in the 90s. And it referred to a preference of relations as hierarchical rather than equal. And measurement research later on indicated that right-wing authoritarianism consists of three sub-dimensions: authoritarian submission, conventionalism, and punitiveness, aggressivity against individuals that do not conform to norms, while social dominance orientation is built on the two sub-dimensions of social dominance over other individuals and anti-egalitarianism. And correlational research later on indicated that while right-wing authoritarianism is related to valuing religion and structure and order, social dominance orientation is rather about valuing power and having social Darwinist view of the world. And right-wing authoritarians usually have conservative motivation, while instead social dominance-oriented individuals are rather against egalitarianism. And the last example, right-wing authoritarianism is about valuing security, conformity, and tradition, while social dominance orientation is rather about self-enhancement and power and hedonism. Therefore, research showed that these two dimensions are, while related, they rather capture different social attitudes, and researchers therefore started to dig deeper into it to explore whether right-wing authoritarianism and social dominance orientation have different origins and psychological mechanisms behind. And this led to the dual process motivational model that has been developed by Dellagiacoma and Sibley in 2009. Dellagiacoma and Sibley define right-wing authoritarianism and social dominance orientation as two relatively independent attitude dimensions. They have different origins and express different set of values. More specifically, these dimensions are the product of two of both factors of the social context and personality that induce certain worldviews and lead to the development of these ideological beliefs. And through the perception of specific aspects in the social life, they lead to similar but yet different socio-political attitudes and behavior. So more specifically, right-wing authoritarianism is a product of a combination of a social context that stresses danger and threat, and a personality that values social conformity. And this leads to a worldview of a world that is inherently considered to be dangerous, and individuals that are high on right-wing authoritarianism perceive social threats in their social life. And the motivation that is developed by individuals with right-wing authoritarianism is rather motivation to preserve the social order and the social cohesion. Instead, social dominant-oriented individuals rather have a tough-minded personality, and this is combined with a social context that stresses resource scarcity, inequality, and competition over resources and status. And they have a worldview in which they consider the world as a competitive jungle, as Jacquet and Sibley define it. And individuals that are high on social dominant orientation, they perceive competition everywhere in their social life, and therefore they develop competitive-driven motivation to exert their power over other individuals and social groups. So these two attitudes lead to similar but yet different outcomes, and they are usually related with each other, and in particular with the right pole of the political spectrum, yet they lead to similar but different outcomes. And those two dimensions have been studied in regard to political choices, to support for a different policy, and to outgroup prejudice. And they show that while right-wing authoritarians usually vote for parties that call for traditional values, social dominance-oriented individuals chose parties that rather vouch for free market capitalism. And in regard to support for war, right-wing authoritarianism, authoritarian individuals might rather support war against perceived threats, while social dominance-oriented individuals would simply would support war to rather conquer without considering even the social and human costs of war. And in regard to attitude against other groups, right-wing authoritarianism develop negative attitude against groups that are perceived to be dangerous, and therefore immigrants when they are described as threatening, and also when they do not want to assimilate, or at least right-wing authoritarians would rather think like this. Social dominance-oriented individuals instead would rather endorse negative attitude against immigrants, for example, or derogated when they are perceived as derogated, and when they are socioeconomically disadvantaged, and fun enough, when they are considered to be willing to assimilate in the dominant culture and therefore achieve equal status or similar status. Therefore, I started to wonder whether right-wing authoritarianism and social dominance orientation might have different effects also on the perpetration of online hate speech. Of course, the researchers before me did it. In fact, Bilovi and Sorel in 2017 applied the dual process motivational model to right-wing, to the support for prohibition of hate speech, and also to the outgroup prejudice. What they found out is that right-wing authoritarianism and also social dominance orientation are indeed positively related with outgroup prejudice, but only right-wing authoritarians would support the prohibition of hate speech, while social dominant oriented individuals are rather against the prohibition of hate speech. This is in line with the model, but these authors investigated the support for prohibition of hate speech and not specifically the perpetration of online hate speech. in a further study in 2020, the same authors developed the online hate speech epidemic model on the spread of hate speech from the observer perspective. And they distinguish between catalyzing mechanisms and inhibiting mechanisms. And here is right-wing authoritarianism considered to be a protective factor of the spread of online hate speech. And while instead social dominance orientation is not included in the catalyzing mechanisms. And in the model that they developed, neither the motivation nor the social context of social dominance orientation is included in their model. So this is why in my analysis I decided to adopt the dual process motivational model to study the effect of right-wing authoritarianism and social dominance orientation on the perpetration of online hate speech. And I think that this is a powerful model because it indeed includes both personality measures and social context measures. And I suppose that both right-wing authoritarianism and social dominance orientation might have effects on the perpetration of online hate speech, indeed opposite effects. More specifically, these are my hypotheses. For individuals engaging with online platforms, I expect high right-wing authoritarianism to be related with lower odds of online hate speech, following the motivational right-wing authoritarian drive to maintain the social order and to adhere to social norms, while I would expect high social dominance orientation to be related with higher odds of the perpetration of online hate speech because of the competitive driven motivation of exerting power, dominance, and superiority over other individuals. Moreover, I would expect the opposite effects of these two dimensions to be related but yet independent from the political attitude and outgroup prejudice, as right-wing authoritarianism and social dominance orientation should constitute broader ideological and psychosocial dimensions. So coming now to the methods, I applied statistical analysis to the online hate data. They were collected by Geschke and colleagues in 2019 through an online survey that has been run in Germany, and it was conducted by the research organization EU Government between April and May 2019. And the final sample included 7,349 respondents that were aged 18 or over, and representativity is ensured for age, gender, and political behavior and education through statistical weight, and inclusion criteria for taking part into the online survey was to use, to a certain extent, internet at least once per week, and several online platforms were investigated. In my analysis, I use several scales. To investigate online hate speech, I built a scale based on 2 items, and they are I sometimes offend individuals online, I sometimes offend individuals that I don't know online, and I post things that I would not say. Right-wing authoritarianism and social dominance orientation were scales taken from the literature, and I will simply read some items. Right-wing authoritarianism was based on 6 items, 2 for each dimension of submission, conventionalism, and aggression. And examples are, in order to maintain law and order, there should be a tougher action against troublemakers. Crime should be punished more severely, and more should be done for the majority in our country instead of looking after minorities. For a social dominant oriented individual and social dominance orientation, it was a scale of 5 items. And examples are, to get ahead in life, it is necessary to have no regards for others. And to get what you want, it is sometimes necessary to show toughness toward other groups. And the reversed items, it would be good if all groups were equal. 2 other scales were present. First, control variable of online platforms used. It was based on 13 items on the frequency of use of different online platforms, from social media to news and blogs and forums and so on. And a scale on prejudice against our group, in particular against immigrants. And I used the statistical analysis of logistic regression, and it was based on 3 models. First of all, a model with the main predictors, therefore right-wing authoritarianism, social dominance orientation, and the control variable of online platforms use, as without a certain amount of online platforms used, online hate speech can also not be perpetrated. The second model to those, the variables, the control variable of political attitude and prejudice against outgroups, in order to control whether the effects of right-wing authoritarianism and social dominance orientation still remain significant. And in the third and last model, I adjust for socioeconomic variables of age, gender, and education. These are the descriptive statistics as inserted in the model. I apologize for the terrible table. I will explain it in sections. So first of all, we start from the bottom. And online hate speech, this is the dependent variable, and about 10% of individual resulted scoring high on online hate speech. And because of the skew distribution of the variable, logistic regressions were used. And these are the main predictor of the statistical analysis. And it's interesting to note that 75% of individuals resulted high on right-wing authoritarianism, while only 20% of respondents resulted high on social dominance orientation. These are the control variable of political attitude. That was a self-report item, and respondents had to were asked to write on a scale from 1 to 11 whether they consider themselves as right, center, or left. And on the outgroup prejudice scale, 46% of individuals resulted high. And regarding the socioeconomic factors, the mean age of the sample was about 50 years old. 48% of respondents were male, and 70% had a low education, meaning that they did not have a university degree. And coming now to the results and the discussion of my analysis, last table, I promise. And these are the results of logistic regressions on the dependent variable of online hate speech. Overall, the model was statistically significant and explained about 30% of the overall variance. Regarding the main hypothesis, right-wing authoritarianism indeed related with lower odds of perpetrating online hate speech, while social dominance orientation related with higher odds of perpetrating online hate speech. And more specifically, social dominance-oriented individuals were almost twice as much as likely to perpetrate online hate speech. And this model with these main variables explain 25% of the variance, indicating that they are the main predictors of online hate speech perpetration. When controlling for political attitude, the model and for outgroup prejudice, the model did not increase particularly, and yet all the variables resulted significant. And this still indicate that the effects of right-wing authoritarianism and social dominance orientation can be considered as relatively independent from political attitudes and outgroup prejudice. And when adjusting the results for socioeconomic factors, the overall variance increased slightly, and all variables of age, gender, and education resulted significantly related with the odds of perpetrating online hate speech, and in particular, being male resulted as significantly related with higher odds of perpetrating online hate speech. But indeed, what do these results mean, and what do they imply? Back to my main hypothesis, right-wing authoritarians result to be less likely to perpetrate online hate speech, in line with the right-wing authoritarian motivation to preserve the social order, stability, and cohesion, meaning that individuals that are high on right-wing authoritarianism, even if they might have outgroup prejudice, they would still conform to the social norms and not engage with online hate speech. And social dominance-oriented individuals instead result more likely to perpetrate online hate speech, and this would follow the competitive-driven motivational goal of exerting power and dominance over other individuals. And indeed, online hate speech might be a communicative strategy to achieve their power. And more specifically, coming back to the dual process motivational model, right-wing authoritarian individuals, even if they perceive social threats, for example, in immigrants coming to Germany, and they would consider for this the world as a dangerous place, and this might be confirmed in their social relations with friends and family, and they might also find it in the news and social media. They would still not engage with online hate speech, at least as long as online hate speech is against the social norm of their in-group. Social dominance-oriented individuals instead would see the competition in every field of their social and personal life, and in this competition they would also see the possibility to exert their power and to win for social status and resources. And this is related with the personality traits, as we said before, of low agreeableness, a low cooperation, and low cooperation. And low sympathy. and the social context that stresses this this aspect is of resource scarcity, inequality, and competition over resources, status, and power. And I think that this aspects overlap with the neoliberal values of self-interest, of a free and unregulated competition, self-reliance, and blind meritocracy, and that are fully present in our societies. And following the dual process motivational model, not all individuals would internalize these values the same way, but indeed individuals that are high on social dominance orientation might be triggered by them. And therefore, neoliberal social and economic context might give rise to online hate speech perpetration for individuals who are high on social dominance orientation. And while we can discuss, of course, about this, I think that the evidence presented here suggests that a broader comprehensive approach should be adopted to effectively counteract hate both online and offline. And coming now to the conclusion of my presentation, results of this quantitative analysis indicate that right-wing authoritarianism and social dominance orientation have different opposite and independent effects on the perpetration of online hate speech, and psychological mechanisms and social factor context should be both taken into account when analyzing online hate speech and developing intervention programs for against online hate speech. And more specifically, in order to successfully prevent the perpetration of online hate speech, countermeasures should be taken both online and offline, aiming at the development of a more equal and diverse and cohesive society in which individuals are less triggered by competition over resources, status, and power. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Laura, for your presentation and for your paper, draft paper. There's already one question from Francis Freie, who is attending. Yes.
No, I didn't. I did not have a question at the moment. Though I will now. I'm online. Say the distinction between authoritarian personalities and social dominance personalities surprised me in terms of my perception of the way right-wing authoritarians have behaved in my experience. And I would like maybe some more clarification of how that division is made and how far it's an accepted distinction. But a very interesting paper, and I did not intend to comment at this stage.
Okay. Do you have a reaction, Laura, to this, or?
Yeah, the distinction between right-wing authoritarianism and social dominance orientation is based on quantitative research, experimental research. It is something that developed over the years. Of course, while they are both related with political attitudes that are rather right-wing, they still they're still related to different specificities. As, for example, I cited before, most of research is in my presentation was from Duckett and Sibley, but it is indeed international research. The paper I was quoting before indicate that, for example, individuals, right-wing authoritarian individuals, would vote for strong conservative parties that values traditions. while a social dominance-oriented individual rather for free capitalism and deregulation and so on.
May I return for 1 second and ask whether the religious element has been included, because there's quite a lot of research on religious conservative movements who have a high level of intolerance for other groups, for other groups, minorities, for homosexual and lesbian groups, LGBTI, and so on. And yes. I wonder whether how the religious element it links in to this this classification.
Yes, absolutely, and indeed, religion is a value that is strongly relevant for right-wing authoritarianism, but it is not for social dominance-oriented individuals that are rather individualistic and endorse social Darwinist view of the world and so on. And I mean, I'm not saying that right-wing authoritarians do not have outgroup prejudice and negative attitude against social disadvantaged groups. It is rather that they would not act openly against them.
If there's no other reaction, it was a very interesting first exchange. We have some few hands being raised by Ursula, and then Eva and Leon.
Okay, so first of all, Laura, thank you so much for your presentation. I think it's really important also to discover the ones that are conducting hate speech, so very interesting. We had a similar study last year, and we were discovering, quite the opposite, namely engagement in counter speech. And we found that RWA is, negatively predicts the engagement within counter speech. So we found that there is a clear difference regarding the topics of hate speech and the target groups. So I was just wondering, just a short questions, whether this is within your data set, as you can see whether there are differences between people with RWA or not, to other counter speech against different kind of groups.
No, unfortunately, it was not present in the survey, but I would like to know more about what you found in yours, like in your analysis, like against which specific outgroups.
Yeah, we saw a lot of differences concerning the religious groups, or whether this is against politicians, for example, or something like body shaming and so on. So the right-wing ideology is more important, not surprisingly, when it comes to religious groups and minorities like that. But they do counter sometimes against hate speech that is directed, for example, against women, or against people that with another, sometimes also LGBTQIA+, something like that. So this distinction may be kind of interesting also for your research. Maybe it's something for follow-up studies.
Thank you, Ursula, for your question, which actually came also to my mind while reading your paper, Laura. So thank you a lot. Okay, we have another question from Eva.
Thank you. Thank you, Laura, so much for the paper and the presentation. A couple of comments again. I think the tables you presented in the presentation really helped understanding the paper, and maybe a suggestion to include some of them in the paper, because at times when you were explaining right at the beginning the two spectrums, I found myself trying to divide them in the way you divided them in your presentation, so it could just be helpful for the reader. Also, congrats on the hypothesis. I guess you formulated 3 and they both were confirmed, so that's a good intuition as well. That's just broad comments, but then couple of more specific comments. So I also, similarly to what Francis said at the beginning, I question a bit the point of departure. So these division between the two terminologies. I understand, of course, this is a framework, you decided to follow it, but also as a layperson looking at your work, the division for me immediately, that both of them fit in under a right wing spectrum. And I think related to also the way I've read your paper, and I think you've spoke to the political influence, it does not come out so clearly as that we are speaking in fact about both fit under the right wing spectrum. It's just that because of the terminology, I think, and if I understood correctly, one of your conclusions is that the right-wing authoritarians are not so prone to actually perpetuate online hate speech, if I understood correctly, compared to the SDO. Because of the terminology, it could give them an argument to say, oh, we're not to blame. Even though, of course, both profiles could exist within extreme right-wing parties, right? So I guess that clarification would be very helpful to also address any potential reactions to the paper that, you know, and intentionally could bolster or could give arguments for right-wing people to just say, well, we're not to blame in a way. That's what came to my mind. And then I guess more in terms of the model. So in the second model, you say, that you've evaluated the influence of the political spectrum, but this was self-identification, right? So I also think that also there, the caveat could be strengthened, the caveat that it is indeed self-identification, because it really depends on how they see themselves, right? So the fact that it influences or not, I think the caveat could be strengthened maybe. And then the third model where you say you study socioeconomic variables, the economic side of the study, I don't really see it so clearly. I don't know if that's something that you could explain a bit better. I see, of course, a relationship with education, but I don't know if that you could explain a bit better, because of course, when we say economic, I guess resources are, you know, are these people poor? What sort of resources they have? Is it, so how do you see this aspect in your paper? And then also, I don't know if there's disaggregated data of how these three variables affected the findings, but it would be interesting as well to understand in terms of, if they had a different impact, because here we see them all together, right, impacting the study. But thank you.
So before I forget, I would directly answer Ava's questions. And so first of all, on right-wing authoritarianism and social dominance orientation, there are both indeed of part of the right-wing spectrum. Yet the interesting part, I think, is that it is necessary to be more specific on who, because not everybody from the right-wing political spectrum would engage with online hate speech. And therefore this specifies this part. And related to the self-report measures, well, yes, indeed, it's not necessarily everybody that is voting for a right party would consider themselves as right, yet the majority, let's say. And but one of the main reasons why I decided to go for the self-report measure instead of the political party that has been chosen is that not everybody is going to vote. And sometimes people do not even remember what they voted in 2017. And that's why in sociology is sometimes considered as a good measure. So that was the rationale behind. And regarding the socioeconomic factors, Well, I included that rather to adjust the analysis and the results, and not specifically to look into the socioeconomic factors per se. And the reason why income is not included is because, individuals, also in this case, do not always know how much they earn per year or per month. It depends a bit on the on how the question is framed. They are not always willing to say how much they are really earning. And indeed, there were a lot of missings. So it was not really possible to include this. And also in regard, for example, to immigration background or this kind of socioeconomic factors, it was indeed present in the survey, but no information was present on where people came from, and it was very difficult to use it. That's why I had rather these three variables. And thank you for your comments, though.
Thank you. And next question from Leon.
Yes, thank you for this exciting presentation. It was really, really fascinating. I have two questions. One regarding the dual process motivational model, as I have not studied that one before. Do you, does this model work in a way that you're either right-wing authoritarian or social dominance oriented? So there is no in between. If I'm not right-wing authoritarian, I have got to score high on social dominance orientation. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, or you would score low on social dominance orientation and therefore rather prefer for egalitarian relations, for example.
All right, so I have to be one or the other. I have to score high on one, basically.
Might also have lower, they are still related, therefore, it could be the case that you score low on both right-wing authoritarianism and social dominance orientation.
All right, because your data indicated that almost 100% of participants in the YouGov survey you cited were scored high on either one. And the other question I have was regarding your logistic regression table. I'm just very curious to know the odds ratios for the items that were not shown for high education, for example. What was the correlation?
Well, it is actually there in the sense that you are comparing the likelihood for individuals that either score high or score low. And the likelihood of individuals that score high to fall into perpetration of online hate speech or not perpetration of online hate speech as compared to individuals that scored low.
Oh, I see. All right, then. Thank you for your answers.
Okay, and next question from Sonia.
Yes, thank you. However, I think that Tegan was putting her hand up long before me, so.
Yeah, you can go, it's okay.
Okay, thanks. I have just one or two quick questions, actually. The first one is whether you have any guess on the impact of social desirability, hard, tricky word for me to pronounce in English, on the question of online hate speech. So that was the first question. And the second one, maybe you can comment on the high percentage of people scoring high on right-wing authoritarianism in your data. I was a bit surprised by that. So yeah, those are my two quick questions.
Yes, thank you for your questions. And indeed, for sure, the dependent variable of online hate speech perpetration was affected by social desirability. It was the question was framed in a way that it was still gathering some results for individuals that would affirm that they offend sometimes individuals that they don't know online, and that they would post things that they would not say. For sure, there are some effects of desirability, yet about 700 of respondents answered that they would rather agree with those questions. They were like a scale from 1 to 4, and I took only the responses of people who said that they would agree with both questions. And in regard to right-wing authoritarianism, I like the questions were based on the mean, both in the case of right-wing authoritarianism and social dominance orientation, and then it was dichotomized based on so it was from 1 to 4, and it was dichotomized for high from 2.5 on. So the scales were built the same way, and I was also surprised that right-wing authoritarianism was so high. Back to the data, it's it was like the mean age of the population was around 50. This is rather an older sample, I would say, and while crossing between right-wing authoritarianism and the political attitude, it was interesting to see that also individuals that that consider themselves as left actually resulted high on right-wing authoritarianism, which indicates that in a way it's got data also from individuals that are authoritarians on the left side, and on the other side, I mean, these are I can only say that at the scale where built the same, and this were the results.
Okay, thank you. And Tegan.
So thanks very much, Laura. It's been nice to hear about some of your research now, because as you said, we've all been in the same network for a while. It's a little bit different to the sort of research I engage with normally, because it's normally like literature reviews. I'm not used to sort of seeing findings like this and stuff. So bear with me if this is an appropriate question or not. But and I also understand, if I understand that the data you got was from the survey that was done a little bit before, but it's kind of linked to Francis's question, and also considering the keynote that we had earlier, just to the impact or relation with race and racism and superiority of race. Because whilst I know that obviously right-wing authoritarianism doesn't always have to be linked to notions of white supremacy or the hierarchy of race and conceptualizations, but I would think that there would be an overlap. So also how Francis's first question was the link with religion and religious belief. I was just wondering if there was import or data or an impact of the participants' race and someone's race into their inclination to either be right-wing authoritarianism or social dominance orientated, if that's the right way to say it. But thanks.
Yes and no. I mean, first of all, in the presentation that we saw this morning, it was about right-wing extremism, and in this case, it was like also my definition of online hate speech was not specifically on, like, let's say, the extremism part. But back to race, as I was saying before, there was a question on migration background, not on skin color, but actually migration background based on first, second, and third generation. but there was nothing on the where individuals come from. And this is, I think, a huge problem in social sciences and data privacy, because indeed it would be extremely important to consider this as well. Because of data privacy, sometimes it is not, or most of the time, it is not asked in German surveys in particular.
Okay, thank you. And Eva has another question.
Thank you. Yes, it just occurred to me another question about the definition that you've used. So you said you've asked them whether they offended people or not, right? And I'm just trying to understand if it was difficult to control in a way this expression. Was this expression an offense on the basis of innate characteristics, or was that something that you were able to control to a certain extent? Because of course, I guess in the event that was something difficult to control, it could also be treated as bullying, cyberbullying, or some other different, or of course there could be an overlap with different typologies of criminal offenses or discrimination. So I'd be happy to hear your thoughts on that. Thanks.
Two things. I mean, if I ask a direct question, do you offend people that you don't know based on their race or migration background and so on, nobody would say yes. And this is a problem of social desirability that we mostly have in social sciences. So that's why the question was rather going a bit around, and a bit, but not too much, for sure. And yet, sorry, I lost my thoughts. Regarding cyberbullying, I'm sorry. Well, in that case, usually individuals do know their victim. And in this case, the question was framed as I sometimes offend individuals, foreign people, so strangers, sorry. So people that I do not know. And that was, a way to go around this. And it was, again, combined with the question, I post things that I wouldn't say. And again, it was not a yes/no question, but rather I agree, I somewhat agree, I somewhat disagree, and I disagree.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other question from the floor? Or I would have a few comments and question. Okay, Martin, please.
Yeah, as we have time left, I would just add my thoughts. I find that really an interesting and relevant paper because we have learned before that this field of hate speech perpetrators is not a homogeneous field, but a very, very heterogeneous one. And this approach helps us to better understand what might be different factions in this field. And to my impression, it has some support, even if you do not rely only on your data, but also if you look at how right-wing movements develop. For example, in Germany, this right-wing party AfD, for example, is a very good example for a right-wing party that emerged not out of this national socialist, racist right-wing party field, but it emerged out of this social dominance culture. It was founded by professors of economics who regretted that Germany lost its financial dominance They felt that the introduction of the euro was a submission of Germany to this European ideology and so on. So that was the origin of this right-wing movement, and only later on it became attractive to all of these other right-wing movements, and a lot of these frictions we observe since a few years within this party goes back to, I think, clash of these two movements, of the more dominance-oriented and the more traditional right-wing, racist, and so on movements. And this is not really discussed in the broader public. There often dominates a more unidimensional debate whether this would be just a clash between more or less extremists. But if you use this framework, you could better explain where these frictions come from. So I find that's really a helpful approach. Also, and many of you may have seen how discussions about quantitative papers like that run in conferences from social sciences. We then like to debate indicators and analytical methods and so on. That would be a lot to discuss, but I think we don't need to do that in detail here. Basically, just that last remark. I also like your databases. It's a very good sample you're working with here, and particularly for your project or PhD, that is a great opportunity.
Laura, do you have any reactions to Martin's comments? Or?
No, well, thank you very much for your comments, and I will. I'm also planning to look a bit more into the political scene of the German country. Thank you.
Any other questions from anyone? No? Okay, I take the chance to ask my question. In your paper, you mentioned that, I quote, online hate speech might function as a communicative strategy to achieve personal and social power over others and to bolster socioeconomic inequality in the world society. And I would suggest maybe an additional function of hate speech, that sometimes hate speech can be used to create or reinforce the bonds within the in-group, especially in online, where everything is based on how we look. So just to sometimes hate speech can be used to create, bonds within the in-group. And in my research experience, for instance, I analyze YouTube comment threads, comment sections, and when a comment conveying hate speech received a counter comment, a comment countering hate speech, no one answered, as if the goal of hate speech was just to put it there and attract likes or even more hateful comments. So this could be another function of hate speech. And then a more general questions that is addressed to you, Laura, but also to the whole group. You concluded your draft stated and actions should be taken on a macro level as well. That is, I quote again, creating more equal, diverse and cohesive societies. And my question is, as academics, as researchers in academia, what do you think is our role? Yesterday we talked about national, international institutions, NGOs, or the minorities themselves that could have a role in it. But as academics examining, analyzing hate speech, what could be our role and how, especially in social sciences, where sometimes we have some difficulties to legitimize our work and our position. It's an open question to everyone, since we have some time left.
Well, thank you very much, Laura, for your comments also on the social bonds. And yeah, thank you for the question as well. Of course, it is always an extremely relevant question. And I think that, yeah, for example, in regard to online hate speech, also addressing more contextual and political economic mechanisms is also necessary to create such a more equal society in which minorities are accepted and they are considered as resources and can play a role in our society that, I mean, cannot be as they have been always been. They do develop, and yeah, I think they might develop more, and we can all benefit from more diverse and cohesive societies.
Okay, thank you. Sonia, please.
Yeah, thank you for this question, Laura, regarding the role of science or social science. One thought that I had is that often you find initiatives that address individuals and try to strengthen them to support people that are targeted by hate speech, or to do the opposite and share positive input. And what I liked about the presentation we heard is, and this relates also to the question, is that we could also make claims more heard that it's not like an individual solution to solve this problem, but that we need. I mean, it's also a political question, and there are also these systems of society that should do something about it, and this could be like one important role of us to take then these results of research we just heard and put that forward in the discourse as well.
Thank you for your feedbacks. We have 3 minutes left. And if there's no other reactions or questions, I would give the word. Oh no, Martin.
Just one methodological recommendation that might be helpful is that maybe you could think of these two orientations more in a two-dimensional space. On one dimension you have this dominance orientation in different strengths, and in the other one the right-wing orientation, and map your respondents in such a space. By that you could identify maybe more than just the two groups that Leon already referred to, but maybe you could identify 1 to 3 more clusters of people with special kinds of a combination of orientations, which could add to explanatory power of your model. But that is just an idea.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. For the moment, I was adopting the model as it is, and therefore with the two. But indeed, analysis need to be expanded and specified. So thank you very much.
Okay, if there's no other question, I would thank again Laura for your presentation and your paper, and would give the word to Ido for the following conclusion of this section.
Well, thank you, Laura, for moderating the discussion and for a very, very interesting presentation.